Title: I worked night shift at an abandoned hospital. It wasn't empty. Before I tell you what happened to me, I need you to understand something. I don't believe in ghosts. Or at least, I didn't. I'm a practical person. I've always had an explanation for everything. But what I experienced during my last shift at Riverside Medical Center changed everything I thought I knew about what's possible in this world. This is my true personal experience, shared for entertainment and discussion purposes. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm just telling you exactly what happened to me on the night of November 17, 2024, and why I walked away from a career I'd spent 6 years building. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in an empty room? Keep that feeling in mind. My name isn't important, but for this story, you can call me Sarah. I'm a nurse, or rather, I was. I worked at Riverside Medical Center in the outskirts of Manchester for almost 6 years. It's one of those old Victorian hospitals that's been added onto and renovated so many times it's become a maze of old and new architecture. Parts of it date back to the 1880s. By November 2024, the hospital was in the process of a major restructuring. Budget cuts meant they were consolidating departments and closing entire wings. The East Wing, where I'd worked for the past 3 years, was scheduled for demolition in January 2025. They were moving all the patients out gradually, transferring them to the newer South Wing. I volunteered for the night shifts during this transition period. The pay was better, and honestly, I needed the money. My student loans weren't going to pay themselves. The shifts were from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and for the last 2 weeks of November, I was assigned to the East Wing to help with the final patient transfers and to ensure the building was properly shut down. The East Wing was a 4-story building connected to the main hospital by an enclosed walkway on the 2nd floor. It had that distinct smell that all old hospitals have, a mixture of disinfectant, floor wax, and something else I could never quite identify. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, and the heating system made these random clanking sounds that echoed through the corridors. By the 2nd week of November, we were down to just 12 patients in the entire wing. They were all on the 2nd floor, clustered in rooms near the nurses' station. The ground floor, 3rd floor, and 4th floor were completely empty. The building that usually housed over 100 patients and dozens of staff now felt cavernous and strange. There were only 3 of us working these shifts: myself, another nurse named David, and a security guard named Marcus who was responsible for the entire East Wing. David and I would split the patient care duties while Marcus did his rounds. The first strange thing happened on November 12th, around 1:30 a.m. I was at the nurse's station, updating patient charts on the computer. David had gone to the break room to get coffee. All our patients were asleep. The wing was completely silent except for the usual building sounds, the humming lights, the occasional clank from the heating pipes, the soft beeping of monitors from the patient rooms. That's when I heard footsteps. Clear, distinct footsteps coming from the corridor to my left. The one that led to the empty rooms at the far end of the 2nd floor. They weren't the soft shuffle of a patient. These were purposeful, measured steps. Like someone walking with determination. I called out, thinking maybe David had come back a different way. No response. The footsteps stopped. I got up and walked down the corridor, checking each room. All empty. All exactly as they should be. I told myself it was the building settling, or sounds carrying from another part of the hospital through the ventilation system. Over the next few nights, I heard those footsteps again. Always around the same time, between 1 and 2 a.m. Always from the empty corridors. David heard them too. We'd look at each other when it happened, but neither of us said anything. I think we were both trying to convince ourselves it was nothing. On November 15th, I had to go down to the ground floor to retrieve some old patient files from storage. The hospital administration needed them before the building was closed. It was just after midnight. I took the stairs because the elevator always felt slower at night. The ground floor was completely dark except for the emergency exit lights. The power to most of the lights had been shut off to save money since no one was using those floors anymore. I had my phone flashlight, and there were a few overhead lights still working in the main corridor. The records room was at the far end of the ground floor, past what used to be the old emergency department. That section had been closed for over a decade, converted into storage when they built the new ER in the south wing. As I walked through those corridors, my footsteps echoed in a way that made the space feel even more empty. I found the files I needed and was heading back when I passed by one of the old examination rooms. The door was slightly ajar. I'm not sure what made me look, but I did. And I saw something that made my blood actually feel cold for the first time in my life. There was a person standing in the corner of the room. Just standing there in the darkness. Completely still. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette against the darker room. For a moment, I thought it might be Marcus doing his rounds, but Marcus always carried a flashlight, and this figure had no light. I called out, "Hello? Marcus?" No response. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer and shined my phone light into the room. There was no one there. The room was empty. I checked every corner, behind the old examination table, everywhere. Nothing. No one. I convinced myself it was a trick of the shadows, my mind playing tricks after too many night shifts. I went back upstairs and didn't mention it to David, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind, that dark figure, standing so perfectly still in an empty room. 2 nights later, November 17th, was my last shift at Riverside Medical Center. That was the night everything fell apart. It started normally enough. David and I did our initial rounds at 11:30 p.m., checking on all 12 patients. Everyone was settled for the night. Marcus came by the nurse's station around midnight to let us know he was starting his patrol of the building. He'd do a full sweep of each floor and then return to his post on the ground floor near the main entrance. At 12:47 a.m., I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock when it happened. The lights on our floor flickered. Just once, but it was noticeable. A few seconds later, we heard a loud crash from somewhere below us. It sounded like it came from the first floor. David and I looked at each other. "I'll call Marcus," I said, picking up the phone. But the line was dead. Not ringing, not busy, just dead silence. I tried the internal hospital network on the computer to send a message to security. The network was down. "I'll go check it out," David said, getting up. "Probably just something fell over in one of the old storage rooms." "I'll come with you," I said, but he shook his head. "Someone needs to stay with the patients. I'll be 5 minutes. If I'm not back in 10, call for help on your mobile." He left, taking the stairs down to the first floor. I sat at the nurse's station, watching the clock. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. I tried calling David's mobile. It rang, but he didn't answer. Now I was getting worried. I checked on the patients, all still asleep, all monitors showing normal readings. I couldn't leave them completely unattended, but something was wrong. I called the main hospital security line on my mobile. No answer. It just rang and rang. At 1:15 a.m., I made a decision. I woke up our most stable patient, Mrs. Chin, an elderly woman who was scheduled for discharge in the morning. I explained there was a situation and I needed to check on something, but I'd be right back. I asked her to press her call button if anything happened. She was confused but agreed. I took the stairs down to the first floor, calling out for David as I went. The first floor was mostly dark, just like the ground floor. Emergency lights provided a dim glow every 20 feet or so. The crash had sounded like it came from the old administrative wing, so that's where I headed. The corridor was long and narrow, lined with offices that hadn't been used in years. As I walked, I noticed something strange. Some of the office doors were open. I knew for a fact they'd all been closed and locked when I'd walked past this area earlier in the week. Now at least 6 or 7 doors stood open, leading into dark rooms. "David!" I called out. My voice echoed strangely, like the corridor was longer than it should be. No response. I checked each open office as I passed, shining my phone light inside. Empty desks, empty chairs, old filing cabinets. Nothing out of place. Until I reached the 7th office. There were wet footprints on the floor, leading from the doorway to the desk, then stopping. Just stopping as if whoever made them had vanished. The prints looked fresh, the water still glistening in my phone's light. But there was no water anywhere else. The floor in the corridor was completely dry. I stepped back into the hallway and that's when I heard it. A voice. Distant, muffled, but definitely a voice. It sounded like it was coming from further down the corridor, from the old records storage area at the very end. I moved quickly now, my heart pounding. The voice got clearer as I approached. It was David. He was saying something over and over, but I couldn't make out the words. I reached the end of the corridor and found the door to the records room wide open. David! I called out as I stepped inside. The room was large, filled with rows of tall shelving units packed with old files and boxes. The overhead lights were on, which was strange because I knew the power to this room had been shut off. Sarah? David's voice came from somewhere between the shelves. He sounded confused, disoriented. I found him in the 3rd row, standing perfectly still, staring at the wall. David, what happened? Are you okay? I touched his shoulder and he jumped, spinning around to face me. His face was pale, his eyes wide. Did you see them? He asked. See you? David, you're scaring me. What happened? He shook his head as if trying to clear it. I came down here because I heard the crash. It sounded like it came from this room. When I got here, the door was open and the lights were on. I came inside to check and... He paused, looking around nervously. There were people in here, Sarah. At least a dozen of them. They were all wearing old-fashioned hospital gowns, the kind they used to use decades ago. They were just standing between the shelves, all facing the same direction, toward the far wall. Not moving. Not making a sound. David, there's no one here. It's just us. I know that now, he said, his voice rising slightly. But I saw them. I know I did. I called out and none of them reacted. I started walking toward them, and as soon as I got close, they just faded. Like they were never there. But Sarah, I saw them. They were solid. They were real. And then they weren't. I wanted to tell him he was tired, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen on the ground floor 2 nights ago. Not after the footsteps David and I had both heard. We need to get out of here, I said. Let's go back upstairs. We'll call the main hospital and ask them to send someone to help us finish the shift. David nodded, seeming relieved. We turned to leave the records room, and that's when all the lights in the building went out. Complete darkness. Even the emergency lights died. My phone flashlight was the only source of light. I grabbed David's hand and we moved carefully toward where we remembered the door being. Behind us, from somewhere deep in the records room, we heard a sound. It started as a whisper, then grew louder. Multiple voices, all talking at once, overlapping. We couldn't make out the words, but the sound was getting closer. We ran. I'm not proud of it, but we ran. We burst out of the records room and sprinted down the corridor toward the stairwell. The voices followed us, echoing through the empty halls. Door after door began slamming shut as we passed, as if invisible hands were closing them behind us. We reached the stairwell and started climbing. Behind us, we could hear footsteps on the stairs. Many footsteps. Running, keeping pace with us. I glanced back once and in the dim light from my phone, I saw them. Shadows. Moving shadows climbing the stairs behind us. They had no features, no distinct form, just darkness shaped like people. David saw them too. Faster, he shouted, and we pushed ourselves, taking the steps 2 at a time. We burst through the door onto the 2nd floor, expecting to see our familiar nurse's station, our patients' rooms. But something was wrong. The corridor looked different. The walls were a different color, a faded green instead of the cream white they should be. The floor was old linoleum instead of the modern vinyl that had been installed 5 years ago. This isn't right, David said, breathing hard. Sarah, this isn't our floor. He was right. The layout was similar but not exact. The doors were in slightly different positions. And there was something else, the smell. That old hospital smell was stronger here, but mixed with something else. Something unpleasant. Decay. We heard a sound behind us and turned. The stairwell door was slowly opening. We didn't wait to see what came through. We ran down the corridor, trying to find the walkway that connected to the main hospital. If we could just get to the main building, we'd be safe. There would be people there, lights, help. But as we ran, the corridor seemed to stretch. We passed door after door, room after room, but the connecting walkway never appeared. It should have been right there, just past the old break room. But the break room wasn't there. Nothing was where it should be. We heard them behind us again. The footsteps. The voices. Getting closer. I grabbed David's arm and pulled him into one of the rooms, closing the door quietly behind us. We stood in the darkness, trying to control our breathing. The room smelled strongly of disinfectant and something else, something medicinal and slightly sweet. The footsteps passed by in the corridor outside. We waited, not daring to move or. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, the sounds faded. The corridor outside went silent. I was about to suggest we try to leave when David's phone buzzed. We both jumped at the sound. He pulled it out and checked the screen. His face went even paler than it already was. "Sarah," he whispered, turning the phone so I could see. It was a text message from Marcus, the security guard. But the message didn't make any sense. It read, "Get out of Ward D. They died there. 1952. Fire. They don't know they're gone." Ward D. I said. This hospital hasn't had a Ward D since before it was renovated in the 70s. David's hand was shaking. The fire. I remember reading about it when I first started working here. November 1952. A fire in the old psychiatric wing. 13 patients died. They couldn't get them out in time because the doors were locked from the outside. It was before all the safety regulations. The psychiatric wing. That's where we were. Or rather, that's where we had somehow ended up. But that wing had been demolished over 40 years ago. It didn't exist anymore. We were standing in a building that had been torn down before either of us were even born. A sound came from the corner of the room. A soft whimper, like someone crying. I shined my phone light toward the sound. In the corner, curled up on the floor, was a figure in a hospital gown. Their face was turned away from us, their body shaking with silent sobs. "Hello," I said softly, taking a step forward. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The figure stopped moving. Slowly, very slowly, they began to turn their head toward us. I don't know what I expected to see, but it wasn't what I saw. There was no face. Where their face should have been, there was just darkness. A void. Like looking into an empty space where a person used to be. David grabbed my arm. "Sarah, we need to leave. Now." The figure stood up. As it rose, other figures appeared in the room. They materialized out of the darkness, one by one. All wearing the same old-fashioned hospital gowns. All with that same empty void where their faces should be. They began to move toward us. We backed toward the door, and I felt the handle behind me. I turned to open it, but it wouldn't move. It was locked. From the outside. Just like it had been in 1952. The figures were getting closer. I could feel a coldness emanating from them, not just physical cold but something deeper. A profound sense of loss and confusion. They didn't understand where they were or what had happened to them. They were trapped here, in this moment, in this terrible place, and they had been trapped for over 70 years. David was saying something, a prayer, I think, and I was rattling the door handle, desperate to get it open. And then, just as the first figure reached out toward us, everything changed. There was a sound like rushing wind and a flash of light. Suddenly we were falling. Not physically falling, but it felt like reality itself was dropping away beneath us. The room spun, the figures vanished, and then we hit the ground hard. We were in the stairwell. The normal stairwell. The lights were on, the proper, modern LED lights. I could hear normal hospital sounds, equipment beeping, voices from the main building through the walkway. David and I lay on the landing, trying to catch our breath. My phone said it was 1:47 a.m. We'd only been gone for 32 minutes, though it had felt like hours. Marcus found us there 5 minutes later. He said he'd been looking for us everywhere. He'd heard us on the second floor earlier, but when he got there, we were gone. The patients were fine, Mrs. Chin had fallen back asleep, and no one had pressed their call buttons. We tried to explain what happened, but the words sounded crazy even to us. Marcus didn't dismiss us, though. He got very quiet and said, "You went to Ward D, didn't you?" We nodded. He sighed deeply and sat down on the stairs with us. "That's why they're demolishing this wing," he said quietly. "I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but you deserve to know. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. 3 months ago, during a night shift, one of the maintenance workers disappeared for almost 2 hours. When we found him, he was unconscious in the basement. He said he'd been in Ward D, that he'd seen the patients from the fire. He quit the next day." Marcus explained that the East Wing had been built on the exact site of the old psychiatric building. When they demolished the original structure in the 70s, they left the foundation and part of the basement intact, building the new wing directly on top of it. "Some places hold onto their past," he said. "Especially places where terrible things happened. And this place, it's never let go of that night in 1952. He helped us to our feet and escorted us back to the nurse's station. We stayed together for the rest of the shift, all 3 of us. None of us went anywhere alone. Every light that could be turned on was turned on. We didn't hear any more footsteps. We didn't see any more shadows. At 7 a.m., when the day shift arrived, David and I submitted our immediate resignations. We didn't even stay to explain in detail. We just needed to leave and never come back. I later learned that the hospital accelerated the demolition schedule. Instead of January 2025, they brought in the crews in December. The entire East Wing was torn down in 3 days. They dug out all the old foundations, all the way down to bedrock, and hauled everything away. The space is now a parking lot. That was 6 weeks ago. I found a new job at a modern hospital across town, all glass and steel and natural light. I work day shifts now. I don't think I could handle another night shift, not after what I experienced. David moved to London. We text occasionally, but neither of us likes to talk about that night. What is there to say? We experienced something that shouldn't be possible, something that challenges everything I thought I understood about reality. Sometimes I wonder about those 13 patients who died in the fire. Are they at peace now that the building is gone? Or are they still trapped somehow, confused and frightened, waiting for someone to unlock doors that don't exist anymore? I don't have those answers. All I know is what I saw and what I felt. And I know I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps in empty corridors, or the sight of those faceless figures reaching out toward us in the darkness. Thank you for listening to my experience. If you've had similar encounters with places that seem to hold on to their past, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I share true paranormal experiences every week, stories from people who've encountered things they can't explain. And remember, some places never forget. Some places hold on to their trauma, their fear, their loss. Ward D held on to its ghosts for over 70 years. What other places are doing the same? Until next time, stay safe out there.